Good morning, y'all. I want to take y'all somewhere we do not go on this channel very often, and that is straight down thousands of feet beneath the ocean floor off the coast of Northern California. Because scientists just published research revealing that the ground down there is not what anybody thought it was. Not the shape of it, not the number of pieces it is broken into, not even where the actual boundary between two of North America's most dangerous tectonic plates truly sits. I want to walk y'all through exactly what researchers found, how they found something this significant hiding in plain sight for so long, and what it means for one of the most seismically active stretches of coastline in the entire country. Let's start with where we are talking about, because the location itself is the reason this region gets so much attention from seismologists in the first place. Off the coast of Northern California, near the town of Cape Mendocino, sits a place called the Mendocino Triple Junction, the exact point where three of Earth's tectonic plates meet and grind against one another simultaneously. This is widely considered one of the most seismically active spots on the entire North American continent, and it sits at the southern end of the Cascadia subduction zone, the same massive fault system responsible for the historic magnitude 9 earthquake back in the year 1700, and just north of the San Andreas fault, the boundary running the length of California responsible for some of the most famous earthquakes in American history. Having 3 major plate boundaries converging in one spot already makes this one of the most structurally complicated pieces of ground on the planet. What researchers just found makes it dramatically more complicated than that. A team led by David Shelley, a geophysicist with the United States Geological Survey's Geologic Hazard Center, working alongside researchers from UC Davis and the University of Colorado Boulder, published their findings on January the 15th of this year in the journal Science. And I want to explain exactly how they pulled this off, because the method itself is genuinely clever. Instead of relying on major feel-it-in-your-bones earthquakes, the kind that make headlines, the team focused on something called low-frequency earthquakes, tiny tremors thousands of times weaker than anything a human being could ever feel. These tremors happen constantly, quietly, deep underground, wherever tectonic plates are grinding against each other. And by tracking thousands of these faint signals using a dense network of seismometers spread across the Pacific Northwest, the research team was able to build an entirely new, far more detailed picture of exactly what is moving beneath this stretch of coastline. And what they found genuinely upended the existing textbook picture. Instead of the standard 3 plates everybody has been taught define this junction, researchers identified 5 distinct moving pieces, with 2 of them hidden completely beneath the surface, never before detected by any previous model. I want to walk y'all through both of these hidden pieces, because each one tells its own story about how complicated this region's underground plumbing really is. The first hidden piece is what the research team named the Pioneer Fragment, and it is, in a very real sense, a survivor from deep geological history. Millions of years ago, an ancient oceanic plate called the Farallon Plate ran along much of California's coastline, slowly diving beneath North America the way subducting plates typically do. Over tens of millions of years, most of that ancient plate sank straight down into the mantle and effectively disappeared from the modern picture. But this particular piece, the Pioneer Fragment, never followed that same path. Instead, it got stuck to the Pacific Plate, and rather than sinking straight downward the way the rest of its ancient parent plate did, it now slides sideways beneath North America instead. That sideways motion creates a nearly horizontal fault between the Pioneer Fragment and the North American plate, sitting hidden below the surface, in a location and orientation that older seismic models completely overlooked because nobody had a reason to expect a fault oriented quite like that, sitting exactly there. The second hidden piece is a separate chunk that is broken off the North American plate itself, and it is currently being pulled downward alongside the neighboring Gorda Plate as that plate continues sinking beneath North America in the normal subduction process. Finding this detached piece helps solve a genuine, long-standing scientific mystery. Researchers explained that this newly identified structure helps account for why a significant earthquake back in 1992, centered right in the same region, occurred at such an unusually shallow depth. According to Catherine Materna, one of the researchers involved in this work, the actual surface being pushed beneath North America in this area sits considerably shallower than scientists had previously assumed. As she put it had long been assumed that fault lines simply follow the leading edge of whichever slab is subducting. But this discovery deviates from that assumption entirely. The plate boundary, in other words, is not actually sitting where geologists had spent decades believing it was. I want to spend a moment on the tidal piece of this research too, because I think it is one of the most genuinely elegant parts of the entire study. To test and refine their new underground model, the research team examined how these tiny, low-frequency earthquakes respond to tidal forces generated by the gravitational pull of the sun and the moon, the exact same forces responsible for ocean tides. When those tidal forces happen to line up with the natural direction the underground plates are already moving, the rate of these small tremors measurably increases. That relationship gave researchers a genuinely independent way to test whether their new 5-piece model actually reflected how the ground down there behaves in the real world, rather than simply being a theoretical reconstruction. And the tidal response data lined up with their model, giving the team real confidence that this newly identified underground structure is accurately capturing what is physically happening beneath this stretch of coastline. So why does any of this matter beyond being a genuinely fascinating piece of earth science? I want to be careful and precise here, the same way I try to be with every piece of seismic research I bring to y'all, because a discovery like this deserves an honest explanation of its actual implications, rather than an exaggerated one. This research does not tell us a major earthquake is coming soon, and it does not establish that the underlying hazard along this stretch of coastline has suddenly increased. What it does tell us is that the actual physical structure controlling how future earthquakes in this region behave, where exactly the active fault surfaces sit, how deep they run, and how the different pieces of crust interact with one another, is meaningfully different from what seismologists had been working with for decades. That matters enormously for hazard modeling, because emergency planners, structural engineers, and seismologists building future earthquake scenarios all depend on an accurate underlying structural picture, and this research shows that the previous picture for this specific junction was missing 2 entire pieces of the puzzle. I also want to explain why this particular junction carries such serious, well-established hazard independent of this new discovery, because I do not want anybody watching this video to think the concern here is somehow new. The Mendocino Triple Junction sits at the meeting point of the Pacific Plate, the North American Plate, and the Gorda Plate, which is itself the southernmost remnant of the larger Juan de Fuca plate system I have covered on this channel before. This convergence of 3 major plates in one relatively compact area produces frequent, sometimes powerful earthquakes, and the region has a well-documented history of significant seismic events, including the 1992 Cape Mendocino earthquake I mentioned a moment ago, a magnitude 7.2 event that caused real damage across Humboldt County. This new research helps explain the specific mechanics behind an earthquake like that one, and by extension, it gives seismologists a considerably improved foundation for understanding how future earthquakes in this exact area are likely to behave. Let me also touch on how this discovery fits into a broader pattern of research I have covered recently across this stretch of coastline, because I think Northern California's underground picture is genuinely being rewritten in close to real time right now. Earlier this year, I covered a separate but related study showing that the Juan de Fuca plate, just to the north of this triple junction, is tearing apart as it subducts, fragmenting into microplates in a process captured through detailed seismic imaging off Vancouver Island. And separately, other researchers have been investigating whether a major Cascadia earthquake could actually trigger a secondary earthquake along the San Andreas fault within minutes or hours, based on unusual sediment layers left behind by ancient underwater landslides. Individually, each of these studies represents a genuinely significant advance in understanding one specific piece of this incredibly complex tectonic puzzle. Together, they paint a picture of a region where the underlying structure is proving to be considerably more intricate, and in some cases more interconnected, than the historical model scientists have relied on for decades. I also want to spend a little more time on the technology that actually made this discovery possible, because I think it deserves genuine credit as a significant advance in how seismologists can study something happening miles beneath the ocean floor without ever physically drilling down to see it directly. The dense network of seismometers researchers use to track these thousands of low-frequency earthquakes spans a wide stretch of the Pacific Northwest, continuously recording ground motion far too subtle for any human being to notice, processing that enormous volume of extremely faint signal data, separating genuine low-frequency tremor activity from ordinary background noise, and then using the timing and location of thousands of these individual tiny events to reconstruct the 3-dimensional shape of hidden fault surfaces deep underground, requires exactly the kind of large-scale, computationally intensive analysis that simply was not feasible with the technology and seismometer coverage available even a decade or 2 ago. This is part of a broader trend I have talked about before on this channel, where advances in both sensor density and computational power are letting Earth scientists observe structures and processes that were essentially invisible to previous generations of researchers, revealing that regions we thought we already understood reasonably well often turn out to be considerably more structurally complex once you have the tools to actually look closely enough. I also want to draw a direct comparison to another piece of fault research I covered recently, because I think putting these 2 studies side by side actually illustrates something important about the current moment in earthquake science more broadly. Earlier this year, researchers studying the aftermath of a major earthquake on Myanmar's Sagaing Fault, a structural close cousin of California's own San Andreas Fault, discovered that the rupture extended dramatically farther than the standard seismic gap model had predicted, upending assumptions about how predictably these mature strike-slip faults behave from one earthquake cycle to the next. Now here, in this completely separate piece of research focused on the Mendocino triple junction, we have a team discovering that the underlying structural picture itself, the actual number and shape of the moving pieces involved, was incomplete in ways nobody had previously identified. Different fault systems, different research teams, different specific findings, but the same underlying theme running through both stories, which is that improved imaging technology and more sophisticated modeling techniques are actively revealing that some of the earthquake science community's long-standing structural assumptions need real revision, not because previous researchers did anything wrong, but simply because the tools available today let scientists see considerably more than what was visible even a few years ago. Let me spend a little more time on that 1992 earthquake I mentioned, because I think the historical detail genuinely helps illustrate why this new structural discovery matters so much to people living across this region. The magnitude, 7. 2. Cape Mendocino earthquake struck in April of 1992, causing significant structural damage across Humboldt County, sparking fires in the town of Scotia, and generating a small but real tsunami along the immediate coastline. That earthquake was followed by a sequence of powerful aftershocks over the following days, a pattern that genuinely rattled the entire regional community and left a lasting impression on local emergency planning in the decades since. For years, seismologists studying that event puzzled over why the rupture occurred at such a comparatively shallow depth, given the assumed geometry of the subducting slab in that location. This new research, identifying the detached chunk of North American plate being pulled downward alongside the Gorda plate, finally offers a structural explanation for that shallow rupture depth, closing a scientific question that had lingered, at least partially unresolved, for more than 3 decades. That kind of retroactive clarity, being able to look back at a well-documented historical earthquake and finally understand the specific underground mechanics that produced it, is exactly the kind of scientific payoff that makes this discovery so significant to researchers studying the region, even without any change to the near-term hazard outlook itself. I also want to acknowledge the broader seismic history of this stretch of Northern California, because the 1992 earthquake was far from an isolated event for this region. Humboldt County and the surrounding North Coast area experience meaningfully more earthquake activity, on average, than most other parts of California, precisely because of the triple junction sitting just offshore. Residents across Eureka, Fortuna, Ferndale, and the broader Humboldt Bay region have grown accustomed to feeling smaller, more frequent earthquakes as a routine part of living in this specific geologic setting. And local building codes, tsunami evacuation planning, and public earthquake education efforts have been shaped directly by this long, well-documented history of regional seismicity. This new research adds a deeper, more precise scientific foundation underneath decades of already established local awareness, rather than introducing a fundamentally new concern to a community that has, in many ways, already been living with and adapting to this exact hazard for generations. I also want to mention what comes next for this research, because the team behind this discovery has been clear that this is a foundation for continued work, rather than a finished, closed chapter. Researchers plan to keep refining their model of this newly identified 5-piece structure using continued monitoring from the region's seismometer network, and they expect this improved understanding of the Pioneer fragment and the detached North American plate chunk to feed directly into updated hazard models used by agencies like the USGS as they continue refining earthquake scenario planning for Northern California's coastline. Science like this rarely produces a single final answer, and this study is very much a foundational piece that future research will continue building on, testing, and refining as more data comes in from this genuinely complex corner of the continent. So what does this mean for the people actually living across this stretch of Northern California, from Cape Mendocino and the broader Humboldt County region down through the rest of the state? I want to be honest that this specific research does not change the day-to-day guidance I would give anybody in this region. The Mendocino Triple Junction has always been recognized as one of the most seismically hazardous locations on the West Coast, and that recognition existed long before this new study came out. What this research does is refine, with considerably more precision, exactly how that hazard actually operates at a structural level, information that will ultimately feed into better hazard models, more accurate ground shaking predictions for future scenario planning, and a clearer scientific foundation for the ongoing preparedness work already underway across Northern California's coastal communities. If you live anywhere across this stretch of coastline, from Eureka and the broader Humboldt Bay region down through Mendocino County and beyond, the guidance remains the same. Steady preparedness guidance I give for any major seismic hazard zone. Keep your household emergency kit stocked and current. Know your tsunami evacuation route if you live anywhere near the immediate coastline. since this exact junction has produced tsunami-generating earthquakes in the past. Secure heavy furniture and water heaters against tipping. And understand that research like this, however technical and academic it might sound on the surface, ultimately exists to make the emergency planning, protecting your community, more accurate and more effective over time, not to signal some new, imminent danger that did not exist before this specific study came out. If you found this breakdown helpful, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because I want to keep bringing y'all the real science behind discoveries like this one, especially along a stretch of coastline that deserves just as much attention as the more famous sections of the San Andreas further south. Share this video with anybody you know living across Northern California, because understanding exactly what is moving beneath your own community is exactly the kind of information that helps people stay informed without falling into unnecessary alarm. I will keep watching for updates as more research comes out of this region, and I will bring y'all the next piece of this story the moment there is something new to report. Stay informed, stay prepared, and I love y'all.